You ever see those weird stories where a woman marries her dog? Well, I used to think those stories were pretty weird too, but then I bought the Fujifilm XT4 and now I still think those stories are pretty weird.
It didn't move. It didn't move. That was traumatic.
First, why don't I regale you with the fascinating story of how I came to love my Fujifilm XT4. This'll be quick, I promise. I first started photography in my teens with a cheap Panasonic Lumix point and shoot camera and really loved the images because they were vivid and totally oversaturated. Contrast that with my current addiction to the gloomy, shadowy classic neg simulation, and that'll give you a small insight into my current psychiatric state. When I started to take photography more seriously, I bought the Sony a6000 during that whole craze. But the ergonomics of that camera didn't really do it for me. It was too small and fiddly, so I upgraded to the full-frame Sony a7R. Unfortunately, in my infancy, I was just some clown listening to what other clowns on the internet were telling me. And whilst they were waxing lyrical about how awesome full frame is, what they forgot to mention was the fact that the lenses are way more heavy, way bigger, and way more expensive. Plus, with the quality of APS-C sensors nowadays, hardly any of us really need full frame. And I'll send anyone a strongly worded tweet if they don't agree with me. Anyway, after lugging 9 kilos all around New Zealand, I decided to sell up and buy a kit that wasn't going to have me lose 10 inches of height by the time I'm 35 due to spinal compression. I scoured the internet looking for the next camera to try out, and eventually plumped for the Fujifilm X-T1 due to its ergonomics, manual controls and beautiful colour science. I actually didn't like the colours on the Sonys. Shocking, right? Fast forward a few years and I've fallen head over heels with the Fuji XT systems and can sort of understand that whole dog marriage thing. It's still a bit weird though. I was really excited to buy the XT4 as soon as it was announced. It's been 2 years now and I have to say that it doesn't disappoint. Not in most aspects anyway. You have full control over the look of your photos in Fujifilm cameras. And while I know there's plenty of film shooting purists out there that like to wear plaid shirts and record slow motion coffee pouring videos, I do really love film simulations and the ability to adopt their recipes of old, whilst having the conveniences of a modern digital camera. The 26 megapixel sensor has good dynamic range at low ISOs, and I often don't mind the high noise images either because the noise on Fujifilm cameras just tends to have a kind of analog grainy look to it. There's something about it that just gives the images more soul. Maybe it's just because I find that style nostalgic, but so many modern cameras look too sharp and clear and clinical. And while I understand people's enjoyment of those types of images, they're wrong. Stabilization on the sensor is hit and miss, and you just really have to work out what you can get away with and what you can't. In low light settings, shooting stills, the IBIS is a real godsend. I've shot images as low as a 20th of a second and got a perfectly usable image out of it. The video leaves something to be desired though. If you pan or walk with the camera, even with the IBIS on, even with stabilization on a lens, there's just this weird juttery, jerky motion to the IBIS. It doesn't matter what frame rate you use, which lens you use, it's within the camera itself. You can alleviate this a little bit in post, but then you're cropping your image, so it's not exactly ideal. I pretty much came to the conclusion that Fujifilm cameras are a powerhouse in the stills department, with kind of video capability duct taped to the side of them. You can get some decent B-roll out of it though, as long as you're keeping the panning and movement to a minimum. Speaking of bad video, I don't like the autofocus during video recording either. Might be on a lens by lens basis, but I've noticed that the camera hunts a lot. You'll often get this random pulsing effect as it loses and regains focus. Particularly annoying while I'm recording a segment like this because even though I'm fairly static and I have eye recognition on, it loses me like my parents often did and I had to go and live with grandma. Because of this, I tend to rely on manual focus and the focus peaking so that I can physically see what I'm actually focused on. The colours are way more vivid in the focus peaking section compared to how they were in the XT1. You could barely see the colours on that model. Again, you can get decent high bitrate video out of this thing, but you just kind of have to put it in a headlock and make it do some weird workarounds to get it to do the things you actually want it to do. One thing that you can do that my idiot brain didn't realise until way down the line is that you can keep the video settings the same as you switch between photo and video mode. I knew that it would keep the same colour profiles and all that, but I was pulling the ND filter on and off with the magnetised front and then changing the shutter dial, and that means that I often had the wrong shutter speed for stills because I was forgetting to change it. Luckily I've cottoned on now that if you set the dial to video and go to the menu, then scroll down to Movie Optimize Control, that will set your aperture and shutter controls to the front and back dials. Not ideal, but this will have your camera remember the last settings you had for your video mode, so you don't have to keep swapping between shutter speeds and apertures and all the rest of it. As for the build of the camera, it's a sturdy construction that's durable and well built. I love the ergonomics and manual controls, which were some of the reasons that I gave Fujifilm a shot in the first place. I also really like the ability to quickly change settings with a dial as opposed to diving into labyrinthian Sony menus, because we Fujifilm elitists actually know how to use a camera. There's plenty of shots I would have lost had I not have been able to quickly turn a dial. Weather resistance has also come into play on more than one occasion. Whilst I wouldn't exactly go snorkeling with the XT4, it's great peace of mind to know that if you're up a mountain and get caught in the snow, or get your skin cut to ribbons by the sand on a windy beach, that your camera's likely to survive. I'm fine taking death by 1,000 cuts as long as someone gets to discover my sweet JPEGs. One of the things I don't like about the build is that it seems to have just been sprayed with this really thin black paint, so brushing it up against anything or banging it just even ever so slightly is going to chip that paint and make it look messy. I take really special care of my gear because I'm obsessive like that, but even I couldn't avoid these marks appearing. It might not be a big deal to most of you, but seeing those blemishes on my camera makes me want to go back to Sony. Just kidding, it's not that bad. I don't like these flappy bits of crap on the side of the camera either. We used to have proper doors that cover the ports, and now we just get this rubbish. I'm not sure which genius at Fuji worked this one out, but none of us like these things. Something that's also polarising is the swivel screen. You either like these things or you don't. I don't know what you want me to tell you. The touchscreen's responsive, so that's positive at least. Battery life is excellent too. I often get a full day shooting photos and getting 4K B-roll out of it. If you're desperate, you can always plug it into a power bank with USB-C and charge it while you're not using it as well. For its flaws, of which it has a few, I still adore this camera. I juggled a few different brands whilst I was searching for the perfect camera, and whilst it isn't perfect, I can't see myself moving away from Fujifilm anytime soon. There's unlimited possibilities with the film simulations, and whilst the video capabilities leave something to be desired, you can still make it work as long as you realise what you can get away with and what you can't. I'm not looking to change this camera anytime soon, and whilst we're all living in an age of wanting to upgrade to the latest and greatest every single year, I can't really give it much higher praise than that. And if there's any Sony fans that I offended during this video, then congratulations, you have no humour.